The operating room didn't fall apart all at once. It fractured second by second under the weight of raised voices, flashing monitors, and a mistake no one wanted to name. Surgical lights blazed at full intensity. Blood soaked the drapes. Alarms screamed in uneven rhythms, each one louder than the last. A senior surgeon barked orders that contradicted each other. A resident froze. A nurse's hands trembled over an instrument she was no longer sure was right. Then one voice cut through it. Not loud, not angry, just calm. Stop. Everyone, listen. The room obeyed before anyone realized they had. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the alarms seemed to fade into the background. In that suspended silence, the balance of power shifted subtly, permanently. No one in that room knew who the quiet nurse really was. They only knew that in the moment everything was about to be lost, she was the only one who knew exactly what to do. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you're drawn to stories where silence carries more weight than rank, consider subscribing. This one starts in chaos and ends in truth. Street Gabriel Medical Center never truly slept. At 3:17 in the morning, the hospital existed in a strange, half-world fluorescent lights humming softly, floors polished to a dull shine, the air carrying the faint mix of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Outside, the city of Baltimore stretched for miles, unaware that lives were being weighed and measured inside these walls in ounces of blood and seconds of time. Operating Room 4 sat at the far end of the surgical wing, a room that had seen everything from routine appendectomies to trauma cases pulled straight from the edge of death. Tonight it waited in sterile silence, instruments laid out with mechanical precision, blue drapes folded just so. Emily Carter stood near the stainless steel prep table, checking labels for the third time. She was 32, medium height, brown hair pulled into a tight bun that never loosened no matter how long the shift ran. Her face was forgettable in the way that let people look past her, soft features, no dramatic expressions, eyes that stayed down unless spoken to. She wore the same scrubs as everyone else, the same badge clipped to her chest, Emily Carter RN. Nothing about her suggested urgency or authority. That was how she preferred it. Emily adjusted the placement of a scalpel tray by half an inch, then stepped back. She scanned the room, not with her eyes darting nervously like the newer nurses, but with slow, deliberate sweeps taking inventory. Oxygen levels, suction readiness, the faint vibration in the anesthesia machine that told her it had been used hard earlier in the night. Across the room, Dr. Richard Halden strode in without looking at her. Halden was everything Emily was not tall, sharp-featured, his presence announced by the confident click of his shoes and the way conversations tended to bend toward him. At 48, he was one of the hospital's most celebrated trauma surgeons, his reputation built on speed, decisiveness, and a long list of saves that administration loved to advertise. He glanced around the OR with a practiced air of ownership. "Why is this tray set up for vascular?" he snapped. Emily answered without hesitation. "Because the incoming case is flagged for possible internal bleeding near the femoral artery." Halden didn't look at her when he scoffed. "It's a chest trauma. We'll adjust if we need to." "We might not have time to adjust," Emily said calmly. That earned her a glance, brief, irritated. "I didn't ask for commentary," Halden replied. "Just do your job." Emily nodded once. "Yes, doctor." She didn't argue. She never did. Not because she lacked confidence, but because she'd learned long ago that timing mattered more than volume. People like Halden didn't listen when they felt challenged. They listened when the world forced them to. The rest of the surgical team filtered in. A resident who looked too young to be carrying this much responsibility. An anesthesiologist rubbing his eyes already on his third overnight case. Two nurses who exchanged weary looks silently, counting down the hours until shift change. No one noticed Emily's hands moving steadily, efficiently. No one commented on the way she seemed to anticipate needs before they were voiced, adjusting a light here, repositioning equipment there. It was invisible work, the kind that only drew attention when it wasn't done. Halden pulled on his gloves. "What's the status on ER?" A voice crackled over the intercom. "Multiple traumas tonight. We're holding steady for now. Weather's turning though." As if on cue, thunder rumbled faintly somewhere beyond the concrete walls. Emily paused for half a second. Weather mattered. It changed response times, changed transport decisions, changed everything. She moved to the monitor station, checking the latest updates. The screen flickered as new information populated alerts, stacking faster than the staff could clear them. Her gaze lingered on one incoming case ID. No name, no age, just a designation and a red flag that pulsed slowly like a warning heartbeat. She felt it then, a subtle tightening in her chest. Not fear, recognition. Halden noticed her stillness. "Problem, Nurse Carter." "No," she said. "Just confirming readiness." "Good. Because I don't need hesitation tonight," he replied, louder than necessary. "This isn't the place for it." A couple of the staff exchanged glances. Emily lowered her eyes again, the picture of compliance. But inside her mind was already running scenarios. She thought about margins, how thin they could be before failure cascaded, about systems that broke under stress, about how chaos never announced itself with a single loud moment but with 100 small ones ignored. A nurse hurried in from the hallway. ER just upgraded an inbound to level 1 trauma. Halden straightened instantly. Details. Male patient. Severe internal injuries. Airlift requested. The words, "airlift requested," landed heavier than the rest. Emily looked back at the monitor. The red flag intensified. "Helipad," Halden asked. "Pending weather clearance," the nurse said. "But they're pushing for it." Halden grinned, energized now. "Good. Let's get ready to move fast." Fast, Emily knew, was not the same as careful. She approached Halden, keeping her voice low, respectful. "Doctor, if it's airlifted in this weather, we should prepare for unstable vitals on arrival. I recommend." He cut her off with a raised hand. "I've handled worse than a little turbulence." "It's not the turbulence," Emily said quietly. "It's the delay before arrival," and enough. Halden snapped. "You're here to assist, not strategize." The room went quiet for a moment. The anesthesiologist pretended to be very focused on his equipment. The resident stared at the floor. Emily nodded again. Understood. She stepped back, returning to her station. On the surface, she looked unchanged. Inside, something hardened, not anger, but resolve. She had seen this before. Not this hospital, not this surgeon, but the pattern. Confidence turning brittle under pressure. Voices getting louder as clarity disappeared. Small warnings dismissed because they came from the wrong person. Outside, rain began to hammer against the windows harder now. A low, distant thrum vibrated through the building, faint but unmistakable. The sound of rotors. Emily lifted her eyes toward the ceiling, listening. The helicopter was coming, and if her instincts were right, the operating room was about to be tested in ways no one here was ready for. By the time the helicopter touched down on the roof, Street Gabriel Medical Center was already running on borrowed calm. Rain lashed sideways across the helipad, driven by gusts that rattled the reinforced glass doors leading into the surgical wing. The low thunder of rotor blades vibrated through concrete and steel, a sound that carried urgency in its wake. Staff paused in corridors, instinctively counting the seconds. Every airlift meant someone had lost a battle somewhere else and was hoping to win the next one here. Emily Carter stood just inside operating room, 4 hands folded loosely in front of her, listening. She didn't need the overhead announcement to know the aircraft had arrived. The pitch of the rotors told her the pilot was fighting the wind. The brief surge in vibration meant a hard landing. None of it registered consciously with the others, but Emily felt each cue settle into place like pieces of a familiar pattern. "Trauma inbound," a voice announced over the intercom. "ETA, 2 or 3 minutes. Dr. Richard Halden rolled his shoulders, energy sharpening his movements. "All right, showtime." The resident straightened, nervous sweat already forming at his hairline. The anesthesiologist took a long breath, steadying himself. Instruments gleamed under the surgical lights, untouched and expectant. Emily moved. She checked suction one more time, adjusted the height of the operating table by 2 inches, repositioned a crash cart closer to the wall. Small changes, barely noticeable. To anyone watching, it looked like routine fussing. To Emily, it was preparation for instability. Her mind replayed the alert she'd seen earlier. No name, no background. Federal designation codes she hadn't seen in years. She remembered how codes like that used to arrive attached to sealed envelopes and armed escorts, how the rules changed when a patient was no longer just a patient. The doors burst open. The trauma team from the ER pushed the gurney in at a near-run rainwater streaking off the wheels. The patient lay strapped down, face pale beneath an oxygen mask, chest rising unevenly. A pressure bandage soaked red covered his left side. Two men in dark jackets followed close behind. They didn't wear hospital badges. Halden clocked them immediately. "Who are they?" One of the men flashed a badge too quickly for most to read. "Federal. That's all I get," Halden snapped. "This is my OR. You'll get what you need," the agent replied evenly. "Focus on keeping him alive." Emily caught the exchange without reacting. Her eyes were on the patient. Male. Early 40s maybe. Strong build under the straps, but his skin had the grayish tone of someone who'd lost too much blood. His breathing was shallow, each inhale a visible effort. She glanced at the monitor as it connected. Heart rate elevated. Blood pressure trending down. Oxygen saturation unstable. Not good. "What happened?" Halden demanded, already scrubbing in. "Multiple internal injuries," an ER nurse reported. "Possible abdominal bleed. He crashed twice en route." Emily felt a flicker of unease. Possible was not a word she liked in trauma. As the team transferred the patient to the operating table, Emily noticed something else, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his right hand. Not from cold, not from fear. Neurological involvement, maybe, or something else entirely. "Let's move," Halden barked. "We're opening him up." The anesthesiologist hesitated. "Vitals are unstable. We may want imaging. We don't have time," Halden cut in. "Scalpel." Emily placed the instrument in his hand without comment. The incision was clean, confident. Blood welled immediately darker than it should have been. Halden frowned. "Suction." Emily complied, watching the flow. "Too much. Too fast." "Pressure's dropping," the anesthesiologist said. "We're losing him." Halden leaned in, jaw tight. "Find the source." Minutes. Stretched. The ore filled with a metallic scent of blood and antiseptic. The resident struggled to keep up, hands shaking slightly as he followed instructions. Emily watched Halden's movements carefully. He was fast, skilled, but he was chasing symptoms, not causes. Her gaze flicked to the patient's abdomen, then to the monitor. The numbers didn't align with what Halden was treating. She leaned in, lowering her voice so only Halden could hear. "Doctor, the bleed might not be where you think it is." He didn't look at her. "Stay in your lane. I believe there's vascular involvement lower." I said enough. His voice carried across the room this time, sharp enough to draw looks from the others. The anesthesiologist's hands paused for a fraction of a second. The resident swallowed hard. Emily stepped back, face neutral. Inside, frustration sparked, but it was controlled, banked like a flame kept low. She had learned long before nursing school that shouting never saved lives. Precision did. The blood pressure alarm wailed. "Damn it," Halden muttered. "Why isn't this stabilizing? Because you're not addressing the right problem," Emily thought. She adjusted suction again, subtly angling it to give Halden a clearer view. He didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. The federal agents stood near the wall, silent observers. One of them watched Emily, now eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion but with interest. "BP's falling fast," the anesthesiologist warned. "We're running out of options." Halden's movements grew sharper, less fluid. Sweat beaded at his temple. Emily stepped closer again. "Doctor," she said softly, "we need to check the femoral region. The injury pattern suggests Halden slammed a bloodied instrument onto the tray. Do you think I don't know what I'm doing?" The room went still. "No," Emily replied calmly. "I think you don't have all the information." For a heartbeat, it looked like Halden might explode. Then the alarms cut through the tension again, louder, more insistent. Heart rate spiking, the resident said, then dropping. The patient's body jerked slightly, the tremor in his hand intensifying before going still. "Charge!" the anesthesiologist shouted. "We're losing him." Halden froze. Just for a second, but everyone saw it. The scalpel hovered midair. His eyes flicked from monitor to patient and back again, searching for certainty that wasn't there. Emily felt the shift before anyone else, named it the subtle collapse of authority when confidence met reality and lost. She stepped forward, not raising her voice, not making a show of it, just close enough to be heard. "Doctor," she said quietly, "if we don't act now, he won't make it." Halden didn't respond. The alarms screamed, and somewhere deep in the hospital, as rain battered the roof and the helicopter cooled on the pad above the operating room, edged closer to a point where hesitation would cost everything. Time in the operating room distorted under pressure. Seconds stretched into long elastic moments, then snapped back without warning. "Pressure's at 70 systolic," the anesthesiologist said, voice tight. "He's not responding." Dr. Richard Halden exhaled sharply through his nose. "Increase fluids. Prep another unit of blood." "We're already on the third," the resident replied, his hands slick despite the gloves. "He's bleeding faster than we can replace it." Emily stood just behind Halden's right shoulder, eyes fixed on the exposed surgical field. Blood pooled and vanished beneath suction, but the rate didn't slow. It never slowed. That was the problem. She tracked the pattern, not just the blood, but the way the patient's body responded. The faint rigidity in the lower extremities, the way the heart rate spiked before each drop in pressure, as if the body were fighting a battle it couldn't win. Her mind aligned the pieces with cold clarity. This wasn't just a chest trauma. It never had been. "Doctor," she said again, measured, respectful. "We need to consider a secondary bleed." Halden's jaw clenched. "I'm already considering everything." "With respect," Emily replied, "the vitals don't match what we're seeing here." He turned on her, then eyes sharp authority flaring. "Are you questioning my judgment in the middle of my OR?" The word "my" hung in the air heavy. Emily didn't flinch. "I'm concerned about the patient." "So am I," Halden snapped. "Which is why I need you to stop distracting me." The resident shifted uncomfortably. The anesthesiologist glanced between them, torn. Emily stepped back half a pace, not in retreat but in recalibration. She had said what she could. For now. Another alarm shrieked. "VFib," the anesthesiologist said. "We're losing rhythm." "Charge," Halden ordered. Now. The patient's body jolted under the shock, then fell still again. The monitor wavered lines, jittering uncertainly. Emily's gaze flicked to the federal agents. One of them, taller, with close-cropped hair, had gone very still. His hand hovered near his jacket, not reaching for anything but ready. The other agent murmured something into his sleeve. This was no ordinary patient. That much was clear. "Rhythm's back," the anesthesiologist said, relief brief. "But pressure's not coming up." Halden cursed under his breath. "Where is it going?" Emily answered quietly, mostly to herself. "Below." She moved without asking. Crossing to the other side of the table, she lifted the edge of the drape near the patient's groin just enough to confirm what she already suspected. A subtle swelling, discoloration spreading fast, internal bleeding, severe, and mist. She looked up at Halden. "Doctor, the femoral artery. It's compromised." Halden hesitated, eyes following her gesture. For the first time since the patient arrived, uncertainty flickered openly across his face. "That wasn't in the report," he said. "It wouldn't be," Emily replied. "It's masked by the upper trauma." The anesthesiologist leaned in. "If she's right," if Halden echoed sharply, then louder. "Scans should have caught that." "They didn't have time," Emily said. "Neither do we." Silence fell again, thicker now. Halden looked around the room as if expecting someone else to contradict her. No one did. The resident's eyes were wide, fixed on the swelling Emily had exposed. The anesthesiologist nodded slowly, the logic undeniable. Halden swallowed. "Fine. We'll check it." It wasn't an admission, but it was a shift. He adjusted position, moving lower. Within seconds, the source revealed itself, blood surging with frightening force. "Damn it," Halden breathed. Suction. Now. Emily was already there. The room snapped back into motion, but something had changed. The earlier confidence was gone, replaced by urgency edged with fear. "Clamp," Halden ordered. Emily handed it to him. His hands trembled just slightly. The clamp slipped. Blood spilled anew. "Pressure's tanking again," the anesthesiologist warned. "We're out of time." Halden tried again, jaw set, but the angle was wrong. The bleeding worsened. Emily watched, calculating. She had done this before. Not here, not in this uniform. But the anatomy didn't change. The rules didn't change. She stepped closer. "Doctor," she said, voice steady. "Your approach is off. You need to come in from the lateral side." Halden's face flushed. "I don't need coaching. You need access, Emily replied. And speed. Another second ticked by. Another drop in pressure. The resident spoke up barely above a whisper. She's right. Halden shot him a look that could have cut glass. But the words had landed. He adjusted, following Emily's suggestion. The bleeding slowed. Not stopped, but slowed enough to matter. A collective breath passed through the room. But it wasn't over. The monitor beeped erratically. The patient's skin tone hadn't improved. We're stabilizing the bleed, the anesthesiologist said, but he's still crashing. Emily felt it then, that deep, instinctive certainty that comes when a situation is about to tip one way or the other. This isn't enough, she said quietly. There's more. Halden looked at her eyes hard. What else could there be? Emily hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because of what speaking next would mean. Her gaze flicked again to the federal agents. The taller one met her eyes and gave the slightest nod, almost imperceptible. Permission or recognition. Emily turned back to the table. Doctor, she said, the injury pattern suggests this wasn't an accident. Halden frowned. What are you talking about? I'm saying this patient didn't just fall or get hit, Emily continued. These injuries are consistent with a targeted assault. That's irrelevant to surgery, Halden snapped. No, Emily replied softly. It's relevant to what they might have done to him. The anesthesiologist stiffened. If there's internal damage we haven't accounted for, we don't have evidence of that, Halden said louder now. Emily leaned in, her voice dropping, carrying a weight that made people listen even if they didn't understand why. We do, she said. We just haven't looked in the right place. The alarms blared again louder than before. Cardiac arrest, the anesthesiologist shouted. We're losing him now. Halden froze. Not metaphorically, not internally. Physically, the scalpel rested motionless in his hand. His eyes locked on the monitor, then on the patient, as if willing the numbers to change through sheer force of reputation. They didn't. For the first time since he'd walked into the OR, Dr. Richard Halden had no order to give. The room waited. And in that suspended moment when hierarchy collapsed under the weight of reality, every instinct in the room turned silently toward the quiet nurse, who had been right all along. The operating room held its breath. The cardiac monitor screamed in a flat, merciless tone that cut through every thought, every doubt. Red numbers flashed, then vanished, replaced by a single, unforgiving line. Start compressions, the anesthesiologist ordered. The resident moved instantly, hands pressing down on the patient's chest with desperate rhythm. Sweat dripped from his brow onto the sterile field. Someone counted aloud. Someone else called out times. Dr. Richard Halden stood frozen at the head of the table, his authority evaporating in real time. Emily Carter didn't move at first. She watched. Not passively, precisely. She tracked the compressions, the timing, the way the patient's body responded or didn't. She listened to the pitch of the alarms, the cadence of voices slipping toward panic. This was the edge. She recognized it intimately. The point where too many people tried to lead at once. Or no one did. Epinephrine, the anesthesiologist said. Now. Emily moved before the words fully landed, drawing the medication, handing it off with practiced speed. Her face remained calm, almost unreadable, but her mind was moving faster than anyone else's in the room. Compressions continued. The resident's arms began to shake. Switch, Emily said quietly. The resident hesitated, then obeyed without thinking. Emily took his place, her hands finding the exact position, pressure consistent, controlled. Not frantic, not hesitant. The difference was immediate. The anesthesiologist noticed first. That's better. Keep that rhythm. Halden stared at her hands, then at the monitor, as if trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed about the room. Another shock, he said suddenly, as if reclaiming ground. The defibrillator charged. The patient's body jerked again. Nothing. The line stayed flat. Time of arrest approaching, the anesthesiologist began. Wait, Emily said. It wasn't loud, but it landed. Halden snapped his head toward her. What did you say? Emily didn't look at him. Her eyes were on the patient's abdomen, the subtle changes in coloration, the swelling that had progressed despite their efforts. We're missing something, she said. Compressions alone won't bring him back. That's not how this works, Halden snapped. We follow protocol. We are following protocol, Emily replied. And it's failing. The word hung there heavy and undeniable. The resident looked between them, fear etched into his face. "Doctor, she might be right." The pressure, Halden raised his voice. Enough, but it was different now. The sharp edge had dulled. The room no longer bent toward him automatically. Emily felt it, the shift she'd been anticipating since the helicopter landed. Not rebellion, recognition. She finished the compression cycle and stepped back, letting another nurse take over. She moved to the patient's side, eyes scanning with ruthless focus. "We stabilized one bleed," she said, speaking to the room, not just Halden. "But his vitals suggest ongoing internal damage. Likely secondary trauma we haven't accessed." The anesthesiologist nodded slowly. "If there's hidden hemorrhaging we don't have time to explore blindly," Halden cut in. "We're already losing him." Emily turned to him then fully. Her gaze was steady, unblinking. "You're losing him because you're reacting," she said. "Not because you're thinking." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Halden's face flushed deep red. "You don't get to talk to me like that." "I do," Emily replied evenly, "because this patient doesn't care who's in charge." Another alarm blared. The line on the monitor twitched just barely. "Wait," the anesthesiologist said urgently. "I've got something." A faint rhythm flickered, weak but present. "Hold compressions," he ordered. The room went silent again, every eye locked on the screen. The rhythm faltered, then steadied. Barely. "We've got him back," the anesthesiologist said. "For now, a fragile victory. Temporary. Everyone knew it." Halden exhaled shakily. "We proceed. Now." He moved to resume, but Emily stepped into his path, not aggressively, just decisively. "Doctor," she said, "if we don't address the underlying cause, he'll arrest again, and again, until he doesn't come back." Halden stared at her, disbelief warring with something darker, fear. "You're a nurse," he said quietly. "You don't make these calls." Emily's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'm a nurse who's telling you the truth." The federal agents shifted near the wall. The taller one glanced at his partner, then back at Emily. "What are you suggesting?" the anesthesiologist asked, cutting through the tension. Emily took a breath, not because she was unsure, but because what she was about to say would change everything. "There's likely a secondary internal injury caused intentionally," she said. "Something designed to be overlooked. We need to check deeper now." Halden scoffed weakly. "That's speculation." "It's experience," Emily replied. The resident frowned. Experience with what? Emily didn't answer him. Instead, she looked back at Halden. "You can keep doing what you're doing," she said. "Or you can let me help you save his life." The words were simple. The implication was not. For a long moment, Halden said nothing. His eyes flicked around the room, searching for support that wasn't there anymore. The anesthesiologist waited. The resident waited. Even the alarms seemed to pause between beeps. Finally, Halden spoke. "What exactly would you do?" he asked. It wasn't permission, but it was close. Emily didn't hesitate. "We adjust approach. We access the lower cavity, properly check for concealed vascular damage consistent with close-range trauma, and we do it now before his heart gives out again." Halden swallowed. His voice came out rough. "And if you're wrong," Emily met his gaze, "then I'll accept responsibility." The weight of that offer settled over the room. Responsibility was something Halden had always claimed easily when success was guaranteed. Now it was a burden. The anesthesiologist broke the silence. "Doctor, if we don't try something different, we're out of options." Halden closed his eyes for a brief, imperceptible moment. Then he nodded once. "Fine," he said. "Show me." It wasn't surrender, but it was the first crack in a wall built on ego. Emily stepped forward, her movements precise, unhurried. She repositioned the drapes, indicated the exact point of entry, her language suddenly more technical, more exacting than before. The resident watched her hands wide-eyed. "How do you know this?" Emily didn't look up. "Because I've seen what happens when people don't." As Halden followed her guidance, the room seemed to reorganize itself around her, not by command, but by instinct. Instructions flowed more cleanly. Movements synchronized. The chaos receded, replaced by something sharper, more disciplined. The monitor steadied slightly, not enough to relax, but enough to hope. One of the federal agents leaned toward the other and murmured, "It's her." The other agent nodded. "I thought so." Emily didn't hear them, or if she did, she gave no sign. All her focus was on the patient, and on the knowledge that the worst moment was still ahead, because when authority starts to crumble, it doesn't fall quietly. And Dr. Richard Halden wasn't done fighting for control. The operating room felt different now. Not calmer, just sharper. Like the air before a storm finally broke. Emily Carter stood at the table's edge, gloved hands steady as she guided the next steps with quiet precision. Dr. Richard Halden mirrored her movements reluctantly, his jaw set, his authority no longer unquestioned but not yet surrendered. "Angle the retractor 3 degrees left," Emily said. Halden paused. 3 degrees was absurdly specific. Then he did it. Blood that had been pooling uselessly shifted, revealing tissue that should have been visible 10 minutes earlier. The anesthesiologist leaned in, eyes narrowing. "There," Emily said. "See the discoloration?" Halden swallowed. "That's not from the primary injury." "No," Emily replied. "It's secondary and deliberate." The word deliberate landed like a dropped instrument. The resident looked up sharply. "You mean I mean someone wanted this missed," Emily said. "They counted on time pressure, on assumptions." Halden bristled. "We're not here to speculate about motives." "We are," Emily said quietly, "when motives affect anatomy." The monitor beeped unevenly. Blood pressure wavered again. "Pressure's slipping," the anesthesiologist warned. "We're losing our window." Emily didn't look away from the surgical field. "Then we stop talking and move." Her tone wasn't commanding in the traditional sense. It didn't bark or demand. It focused. And without realizing it, the room aligned around her voice. "Clamp here," she said. The resident moved instantly, no longer waiting for Halden's confirmation. Halden noticed. His eyes flicked from the resident to Emily, irritation flaring. "I didn't give that order." Emily didn't turn. "You would have." For a split second, it looked like Halden might explode. His chest rose sharply, a retort forming. Then the bleeding slowed. Not stopped, but controlled. The anesthesiologist exhaled in relief. Pressures stabilizing. Heart rate coming down. The alarms softened, losing their frantic edge. A fragile equilibrium settled over the room. Halden stared at the numbers, then at Emily. Something in his expression shifted, not humility, not yet, but calculation. "You're taking a lot of liberties," he said. Emily finally looked at him. "I'm taking responsibility. That's my job." "Then do it," she replied evenly. "Because right now the patient needs clarity, not hierarchy." The words stung. They were meant to. Halden looked around the room. No one met his eyes. The resident was focused on his task. The anesthesiologist adjusted settings without comment. Even the nurses who'd once flinched at Halden's raised voice now moved with a different rhythm, watching Emily, anticipating her next instruction. Control was slipping through his fingers, one quiet decision at a time. "You said this was intentional," Halden said, lowering his voice. "Explain." Emily turned back to the patient. "The injury path isn't consistent with a fall or collision. It's precise, low profile, designed to bleed internally without immediate external signs." The anesthesiologist stiffened. "That's sophisticated." "Yes," Emily said. "Which means whoever did this knew exactly how long it would take before intervention." The federal agents near the wall exchanged a glance. Halden noticed that too. "This patient Halden," said slowly. "Who is he?" "You don't need to know that to save him," Emily replied. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now." Halden's lips thinned. "You're acting like you've been in situations like this before." Emily's hands never wavered. "I have." The resident couldn't help himself. "Where?" The question hung there, naked and dangerous. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she shifted position, exposing a deeper layer of tissue. "There," she said. "That's what they missed." Halden leaned in, despite himself. His breath caught. A concealed injury, clean surgical in its precision, revealed itself. Not accidental, not random. "How the hell?" he murmured. "Exactly," Emily replied. The anesthesiologist shook his head. "If we hadn't found that, he'd have crashed again within minutes," Emily finished. "And next time he wouldn't have come back." Silence followed. Heavy, reverent. Halden straightened slowly. "Why wasn't this in the report?" "Because it wasn't supposed to be," Emily said. The implication rippled outward. One of the federal agents stepped forward slightly. "Doctor, with respect, we need this patient alive." Halden bristled. You think I don't? I think the agent said carefully that Nurse Carter understands what's at stake. All eyes turned to Emily. She felt the weight of it, not fear, not pride, but inevitability. She had crossed a line the moment she spoke up. There was no stepping back into invisibility now. We're not done, she said. There's still internal damage we haven't stabilized. Halden hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. The word felt different than before. Less command, more concession. Emily guided the next steps, her instructions crisp, efficient. The team followed without question. Even Halden moved in sync, his earlier bluster replaced by grim focus. Minutes passed, then more. The monitor steadied further. Blood pressure climbed slowly, stubbornly. We're holding, the anesthesiologist said, awe creeping into his voice. He's actually holding. A flicker of relief moved through the room, but Emily didn't relax. Not yet, she said. We're not in the clear. Why? The resident asked. Emily glanced briefly toward the federal agents. Because people who cause injuries like this don't stop halfway. Halden stiffened. You think there's more, I think, Emily replied. This wasn't just about killing him. Another pause. Then what was it about? Halden asked. Emily's voice dropped, carrying a weight that made the room lean in, sending a message. Before anyone could respond, the monitor beeped sharply again. Not flatlining, but wrong. Pressures dropping, the anesthesiologist said. Sudden. Emily's eyes snapped back to the patient. No, that's not blood loss. What is it then? The resident asked. Emily's jaw tightened. A reaction. Halden frowned. To what Emily's gaze locked on the IV line. To something they put inside him. The realization hit, like a shockwave. You're saying he was poisoned, Halden demanded. I'm saying, Emily replied, already moving, that if we don't act in the next 30 seconds, everything we just did won't matter. The alarms surged again, louder, now more urgent. Emily stepped forward, hands poised, voice cutting cleanly through the rising panic. Stop, she said, and this time no one questioned who she was talking to. The word stop didn't echo. It didn't need to. It sliced through the operating room like a blade, clean, precise, final. Hands froze mid-motion. The resident halted halfway through, reaching for medication. The anesthesiologist's fingers hovered above the controls. Even doctor, Richard Halden, still holding an instrument slick with blood, went perfectly still. The alarms continued their relentless rhythm, but the human noise vanished. Emily Carter stood at the foot of the table, posture straight, shoulders squared in a way no one had seen from her before. Her eyes moved quickly, IV line monitor patient's pupils, then back to the IV again. Disconnect that line, she said. Halden snapped out of his paralysis. That IV is keeping him alive. It's killing him, Emily replied. The anesthesiologist frowned. We switched fluids 10 minutes ago. I know, Emily said. And his pressure dropped exactly 90 seconds later. That could be coincidence, Halden shot back. Emily's gaze locked onto his. It's not. The resident swallowed. What do you think is happening? Emily didn't answer immediately. She reached out and clamped the IV line herself, cutting off the flow. The monitor dipped, then unexpectedly steadied. The room collectively inhaled. There, Emily said quietly. You see it now. The anesthesiologist leaned closer to the monitor. Pressures stabilizing. Heart rates improving. Halden stared at the IV line, then at Emily. What was in it? Not poison in the traditional sense, Emily said. A delayed agent. Something that mimics shock until it reaches a certain concentration. The resident's eyes widened. That's military grade. Emily didn't react to the word. Halden did. You said this wasn't an accident, he said slowly. You're saying this was planned. Down to the oar. Yes, Emily replied. They counted on chaos. On protocol. On no one noticing the timing. The federal agent stepped closer, now no longer pretending to be invisible. The taller one spoke. Nurse Carter. Emily raised a hand without looking at him. Not yet. He stopped mid-sentence. No one missed that. Emily turned back to the table. We flushed the line. Switch to manual administration. No automated feeds. The anesthesiologist nodded immediately. I'm on it. Halden hesitated, then followed suit, moving to assist without comment. The hierarchy had shifted so gradually no one could name the exact moment it happened. But it was undeniable now. As the new line went in, the patient's vitals stabilized further. Not good. Not safe. But no longer spiraling. A fragile silence settled again. The resident exhaled shakily. How did you catch that Emily's hands continued working? Because the body tells the truth. You just have to listen when everyone else is shouting. Halden let out a bitter laugh. You're saying we almost lost him because we were too busy being loud. Emily didn't contradict him. She stepped back slightly, scanning the room. We've bought time. Minutes, maybe. For what? Halden asked. Emily's expression hardened. For what comes next? The anesthesiologist frowned. What comes next? Emily finally looked toward the federal agents. Questions, she said. And consequences. The taller agent stepped forward again, more cautiously this time. Emily, he said. The use of her first name sent a ripple through the room. Halden's head snapped up. You know her. The agent hesitated. Yes. Emily met his gaze. There was no surprise there, only acknowledgement. Not here, she said. Not now. The agent nodded once. Understood. Halden looked between them, anger and confusion twisting together. What the hell is going on? Emily turned to him fully. Right now, a patient is alive because we stopped playing roles. That's not an answer, Halden said. It's the only one you need, Emily replied. The monitor beeped steadily now, a sound that felt almost miraculous after the chaos that preceded it. The resident sank onto a stool, legs trembling. I've never seen anything like that. Emily glanced at him. You will again. He frowned. I hope not. You will, she said softly. That's the job. Halden pulled off his gloves with sharp movements. You took command of my oar. Emily didn't flinch. You lost command of it. The words were quiet, unemotional, and devastating. For a long moment, Halden said nothing. His chest rose and fell as he looked around the room at the staff who were no longer waiting for his approval, at the patient who was alive despite him, not because of him. Finally, he spoke. Who are you? The question carried more weight than any accusation. Emily considered him. The truth hovered at the edge of her tongue, but this wasn't the moment for it. Not yet. I'm the nurse who kept him alive, she said. Tonight, that's enough. Before Halden could respond, the doors to the OR swung open. A hospital administrator stepped in, face tight with urgency. Dr. Halden, she said. We need to talk. Now. Halden stiffened. This can wait. No, she replied. Her eyes flicked briefly to Emily, then away. It can't. The federal agents exchanged another glance. Emily watched the administrator carefully. She recognized the look the one people wore when something much bigger than a single surgery was unfolding. As Halden stepped away from the table, the weight of the moment settled over the room. The patient was stable for now. The chaos had stopped, but the silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. Because when a quiet voice takes command in the middle of disaster, the aftermath is never quiet at all. The door closed behind Dr. Richard Halden with a hollow click that sounded far louder than it should have. For a moment, no one spoke. The patient lay motionless on the table, chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance monitors tracing fragile but consistent life. The alarms had softened to a steady cadence, no longer screaming but still demanding respect. Emily Carter stood exactly where she had been when the administrator entered, hands resting lightly at her sides. She didn't follow Halden with her eyes. Her attention never left the patient. Maintain current support, she said quietly. No changes unless I say so. The anesthesiologist obeyed without hesitation. Vitals holding, BPs climbing slowly. The resident nodded, relief and disbelief warring on his face. I'll prep for the next phase. No one questioned who the next phase belonged to. The federal agents moved closer now, no longer pretending this was routine. The taller one spoke again, voice low. Emily, we need to secure the room. She finally turned toward him. You can secure the hallway. This room stays medical. He hesitated, then nodded. Understood. The administrator lingered just inside the door, eyes darting between the patient and Emily. Nurse Carter, she said carefully. What exactly is going on? Emily met her gaze. Right now, a patient survived an attempt on his life. The administrator's breath caught. Attempt, yes, Emily said. Plural if we're being precise. The administrator swallowed. Hospital security is on standby. Good, Emily replied. They'll be needed for documentation. For what? The administrator asked. Emily looked back at the IV line, now disconnected and flushed. For evidence. The word changed the air in the room. The anesthesiologist stiffened. "You're saying this OR is a crime scene?" Emily nodded once. "It will be." The resident let out a shaky breath. "I thought we were just fixing mistakes." Emily glanced at him. Her voice softened slightly. "Sometimes fixing mistakes means admitting they weren't mistakes at all." The federal agent stepped closer again. "We'll need a statement." "Later," Emily said, "not while he's still unstable." The agent studied her, then nodded. "You haven't changed." That caught the resident's attention. "You two know each other." Emily didn't answer. Instead, she moved to the patient's side, checking reflexes, pupils' response. Her movements were efficient, stripped of any unnecessary flourish. She adjusted a setting on the ventilator, then nodded to herself. "We've stabilized the immediate threats," she said, "but he'll need ICU-level monitoring and isolation." The anesthesiologist blinked. "Isolation." "Yes," Emily replied. "Limited access. One entry log. No substitutions without verification." The administrator frowned. "That's not standard." "No," Emily said evenly. "But neither is this case." The administrator hesitated, then nodded. "I'll make the calls." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Nurse Carter, Doctor, Halden will want answers." Emily's expression didn't change. "He'll get them." Outside the room, footsteps retreated. The resident leaned against the counter, finally allowing his hands to shake. "I don't understand how you saw all that. The IV timing, the injury pattern, the everything." Emily finished securing a dressing before responding. "Because chaos follows rules. Most people just don't know how to read them." The anesthesiologist let out a quiet laugh. "You sound like a field commander." Emily glanced at him, not sharply but not warmly either. In a crisis, roles blur. The federal agent cleared his throat. "For what it's worth," he said, "your instincts just saved a lot more than one life." Emily didn't respond. She moved to the instrument table, removing her gloves, carefully disposing of them in a controlled motion. Only then did she allow herself a slow breath. "Transfer on my count," she said. 3. They moved together, synchronized, efficient. The gurney rolled smoothly toward the ICU doors, guarded now on both sides by federal presence. As they reached the threshold, the resident looked at Emily again. "Will he make it?" Emily paused. "He has a chance. That's all anyone ever gets." They handed the patient off to the ICU team, Emily briefing them with clipped precision, what to watch for, what to avoid, what signs would matter most. No one interrupted her. When it was done, she stepped back, suddenly aware of the quiet hum of the corridor, the distant echo of hospital life resuming its normal rhythm. The federal agent fell into step beside her. "You know this is going to come out." Emily nodded. "I know." "And Halden?" he asked. Emily stopped walking. She turned to face him fully now, eyes level. Halden made choices. Tonight just revealed them. The agent studied her for a long moment. "They'll ask who you are. Where you learned all this." Emily's gaze drifted down the hallway toward the OR she'd just left behind. "They can ask." "And what will you say?" She looked back at him. "The truth, when it matters." Before he could respond, voices rose from down the corridor. Dr. Halden was coming back. His face was pale, jaw-tight eyes burning with something between fury and fear. He stopped a few feet from Emily. "You humiliated me," he said quietly. Emily didn't raise her voice. "You endangered a patient." "That's not how this will be remembered," Halden snapped. Emily held his gaze. "That's not your choice anymore." The agent stepped subtly closer, not threatening but present. Halden noticed. His eyes flicked to the badge, then back to Emily. "What did you do?" he asked, voice lower now. Emily answered him honestly. "I took command when you couldn't." Silence stretched between them. Halden looked around at the staff, watching from a distance at the agent who hadn't been there before, at the ICU doors closing behind the patient. Something in his posture sagged. "This isn't over," he said. Emily nodded. "No, it's just beginning." As Halden turned away, the weight of what had happened finally settled fully into the space he left behind. The OR had fallen into chaos, and in that chaos a quiet nurse had revealed something no title could protect. The hospital never announced its turning points. They arrived quietly on rubber soles, in lowered voices behind closed doors. Emily Carter felt the shift the moment she stepped back into the surgical wing. It wasn't the looks. She was used to being looked past, looked over, underestimated. This was different. Conversations paused when she passed. A charge nurse straightened her posture without realizing it. A security guard nodded, not out of politeness but recognition. The truth was moving ahead of her. She stopped at the sink outside the OR and washed her hands longer than necessary, letting the steady warmth ground her. When she turned, the taller federal agent was waiting. Alone this time. "Emily," he said. She met his eyes. "Agent." He shook his head slightly. "You know that's not what I meant." A beat passed. "Captain," he said instead. With respect, the word landed like a dropped tray. The corridor seemed to hold its breath. Emily didn't react outwardly. She dried her hands, folded the towel once, then again, and placed it carefully in the bin. "Not here," she said quietly. The agent nodded. "Understood. But it's already moving upstairs." "I figured," Emily replied. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Hospital administration has questions. Federal oversight has more. And, Doctor, Halden is trying to understand how a nurse outperformed him," Emily finished. "He'll manage." The agent studied her face. "You disappeared after Kabul." Emily's jaw tightened just enough to notice. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I stopped being useful to people who confuse command with care." The agent exhaled. "You saved a protected witness tonight." "I saved a patient," Emily corrected. "Whatever else he is doesn't change that." "Maybe not," the agent said. "But it explains why someone tried to finish him on your table." Emily looked toward the ICU doors. "Then you'd better protect him better than they tried to kill him." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Dr. Richard Halden emerged from a side office tie, loosened surgical cap gone. His face had lost its earlier color. What remained was a brittle mask of control. He stopped when he saw them. "You," he said to the agent. "Who are you?" The agent didn't flinch. "I'm not your concern." Halden's eyes snapped to Emily. "And you are." She held his gaze. "I always was." He laughed, once sharp and humorless. "You orchestrated that entire scene." "No," Emily replied. "I responded to it. You undermined me in front of my staff." "You froze," she said. "In front of your patient." The words landed hard. A nearby nurse pretended very intently to read a chart. Halden stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They're telling me you're former military." Emily didn't deny it. "Medical command," Halden continued. "Special operations. Classified deployments." "Some of that," Emily said. His eyes narrowed. "Why am I hearing this now?" "Because you never asked," she replied. "You never needed to know." Halden's jaw worked. "You let me make mistakes." "I tried to stop you," Emily said evenly. "You told me to stay in my lane." Silence stretched between them. "You should have disclosed," Halden said finally. "Your background, your training." "I disclosed everything required by my position," Emily replied. "I'm licensed, credentialed, competent." "That's not the point." "It is," she said. "The point is whether the person next to you can do the job when it matters." Halden looked away first. The agent cleared his throat. "Dr. Halden administration will be requesting your presence," Halden scoffed. "For what I saved that man's life." The agent met his gaze. "The recordings disagree." Halden stiffened. "Recordings," Emily watched the realization bloom slow and terrible. "The OR feeds," the agent continued. "Audio and video. Standard policy. Tonight they tell a very complete story." Halden's shoulders sagged just slightly. "You're turning this into a spectacle." "No," Emily said softly. "You did." The agent glanced at her. "They'll want your statement too." "I'll give it," Emily replied. "After my shift," Emily Halden began. She turned to him. "I didn't want this." He searched her face, perhaps looking for satisfaction, triumph. He found none. "Then why stay?" he asked. "Why hide here?" Emily considered the question, the real one behind it. "Because here," she said, "no one salutes. No one expects miracles. And most nights saving one life quietly is enough." Halden laughed bitterly. "You could run this hospital." Emily shook her head. "I don't want power. I want outcomes." The agent's radio crackled. He listened, then nodded. "ICU reports the patient stable, sedated, guarded." Emily exhaled slowly. "Good." As the agent stepped away to take the call, Halden leaned closer. "You think this ends with me suspended?" Emily met his eyes. I think it ends with the truth. And you, he asked. What happens to you? She shrugged. I'll be back on nights. Someone has to keep the place from burning down. He stared at her, something like awe breaking through the resentment. You're wasted here. Emily smiled faintly. That's what makes it work. The administrator approached, then flanked by a risk management officer and hospital counsel. Their expressions were careful, rehearsed. Nurse Carter, the administrator, said, We'd like to speak with you. Emily nodded. Of course. They gestured toward a conference room. As she passed Halden, she paused. For what it's worth, she said quietly, you're a good surgeon. He looked up, startled. You just weren't ready to listen, she added. Then she followed the administrators inside. The door closed. Inside, questions waited about training, about authority, about why a nurse had taken command when a surgeon could not. Emily answered them all the same way, calmly, precisely, without embellishment. Outside, the hospital resumed its rhythm. Stretchers rolled, phones rang, lives continued. But beneath it all, something fundamental had shifted. Because once the truth surfaces, once real authority reveals itself, there's no unseeing it. And the quiet nurse who spoke one line in the middle of chaos could never be invisible again. The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant, a neutral space designed to absorb blame without leaving marks. Emily Carter sat at the long table with her hands folded loosely in front of her, posture relaxed but attentive. Across from her, the hospital administrator, legal counsel, and risk management officer arranged their folders like shields. A small red light on the wall indicated the recording had begun. Nurse Carter, the administrator, said carefully, We appreciate your cooperation. Emily nodded. I appreciate the urgency. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. We'll begin with a simple question. At what point did you believe Dr. Halden was no longer capable of leading the procedure? Emily didn't bristle. She didn't rush. When his decisions stopped matching the patient's physiology, a pause. That's subjective, the lawyer said. It's measurable, Emily replied. Vitals response, curves bleeding patterns. The data was clear. Risk management leaned forward. You're aware that deviating from the chain of command creates liability. Yes, Emily said. I'm also aware that failing to intervene creates a body. The room went quiet. The administrator cleared her throat. There are concerns that you exceeded your scope. Emily met her gaze. My scope is patient survival. That's not. It is, Emily said gently. Everything else is paperwork. The red light continued to glow. They asked about timing, about the IV, about how she recognized the delayed agent. Emily answered each question with clinical clarity, never invoking her past unless it directly explained a decision. She did not mention Kabul. She did not mention rank. Outside the room, the consequences were already unfolding. Dr. Richard Halden sat alone in his office, the blinds half closed. The walls were lined with framed commendations, glossy photos of gala fundraisers' headlines praising his decisiveness. His phone buzzed again, another message from administration he didn't want to read. He replayed the awe in fragments, the alarms, the hesitation, the way the room had turned quietly, decisively away from him. The knock came softly. He looked up to see the administrator standing in the doorway, expression unreadable. Richard, she said, we need to talk. He laughed without humor. Let me guess. Temporary leave. Pending investigation. Her silence answered him. They're blaming me, he said, for trusting protocol. They're holding you accountable, she replied, for ignoring warnings. Halden's jaw tightened. From a nurse. From a professional, she corrected. From someone who was right. Across the hospital, the ICU had become a fortress. The patient lay sedated behind glass machines, humming in controlled harmony. 2 federal agents stood watch at all times, rotating shifts. Entry logs were meticulous. Every IV bag was verified twice. No substitutions, no shortcuts. Emily visited once, standing at the threshold, observing without entering. He's stable, the ICU nurse said quietly. Thanks to you. Emily shook her head. Thanks to everyone who listened. The nurse hesitated. They say he's testifying next week. Emily's eyes flicked to the glass. Then he needs to live that long. Back in the conference room, the final question landed. Would you do it again? The lawyer asked. Take command. Emily didn't hesitate. Yes, Even knowing the repercussions, yes. The administrator studied her for a long moment. You understand this may affect your future here. Emily nodded. I understand. The recording ended. Outside, the agent waited. They're moving fast, he said. Halden's surgeries are suspended effective immediately. Full review. Emily exhaled slowly. That's appropriate. And you? He asked. She shrugged. I'll finish my shift. He smiled faintly. You always do. Later that night, the hospital buzzed with a different energy, quieter, cautious. Word traveled in hushed tones. A surgeon benched. A nurse who took command. Recordings that didn't lie. In the staff lounge, the resident sat staring at his coffee. You okay? Emily asked, passing through. He looked up. I keep thinking about the moment he froze. How everything depended on what happened next. Emily nodded. That's why preparation matters. He swallowed. I want to be like that. Calm. You don't want to be like me, she said gently. You want to be better than yesterday. He smiled weakly. Still, thank you. Across town, a hearing was scheduled. Emails were drafted. Language was softened. Accountability was shaped into something administratively palatable. But recordings have a way of resisting spin. By dawn, the decision was official. Dr. Richard Halden was placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation into clinical judgment failures and hostile work environment concerns. Mandatory retraining was recommended. So was supervision if he ever returned. The announcement was brief. The ripple was not. Emily read it on a terminal between tasks. She closed the message and returned to work. At shift, change the charge, nurse approached her. They want you on days. Emily shook her head. Nights suit me. Administration thinks you should be more visible. Emily smiled faintly. Visibility isn't the same as value. The charge nurse studied her. You're changing things. Only if people let me, Emily replied. Near the helipad, the rain finally stopped. Dawn broke pale and tentative over the city. The helicopter sat silent, now its blades still, as if the night's urgency had drained from it. Emily walked past it on her way out, breathing in the cool air. Her phone buzzed once. A single text from the agent. He's stable. Thank you. She typed back 2 words. Do your job. As she headed home, the hospital behind her looked the same as it always had: concrete, glass, fluorescent light. But inside, the calculus had changed. Because when chaos exposes the truth, consequences follow. And justice, real justice, doesn't shout. It simply arrives inevitable as morning. 2 weeks later, Street, Gabriel Medical Center felt quieter, not because there were fewer emergencies, but because people listened before they spoke. The change wasn't written into policy. It lived in the pauses between orders, in the way eyes flicked toward monitors instead of titles, in the way questions were asked, without fear of being labeled insubordinate. Emily Carter noticed it most at night. She returned to her usual shift without ceremony. Same badge, same scrubs, same locker with the dented door that never quite closed right. But the air around her had changed. Nurses asked her opinion without lowering their voices. Residents slowed down when she spoke. Even attendings, especially the newer ones, made room for her words. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't claim anything. She just worked. The investigation moved with bureaucratic precision. Committees met. Recordings were reviewed frame by frame. Statements were cross-referenced. The hospital's legal team learned quickly that facts were stubborn things. Dr. Richard Halden did not return to the OR. At first, his name was spoken cautiously, like a bruise no one wanted to press. Then less so. Stories surfaced, sharp comments dismissed, warnings, near misses quietly patched over by competent staff who had learned to compensate. The pattern became undeniable. Emily was called once more to testify, this time before a joint medical review panel. She sat beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, answering questions that came with careful phrasing and cautious tone. You're certain your intervention was necessary? A panelist asked. Yes, Emily said. And you believe Dr. Halden's conduct contributed to the crisis? I believe his refusal to listen, she replied. No embellishment, no venom, just truth. Across town, in a secured ICU wing, the patient opened his eyes. The federal agent stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, posture relaxed but alert. You're in Baltimore, he said gently. You're safe. The man swallowed, throat dry. The nurse, he rasped. Did she? She did her job, the agent said. You do yours and this ends. The man closed his eyes, a single tear slipping free. Back at the hospital, the resident Emily had coached found her in the supply room. They approved my request, he said, barely containing his excitement. Trauma rotation. Extra hours. Emily smiled. Good. Use them. He hesitated. They asked why I wanted it, and she prompted, I told them I wanted to learn how to stay calm when everything goes wrong. Emily nodded. That's a good reason. On a quiet night near the end of her shift, Emily received a call to OR4 again. Different patient, different crisis. The rhythm of urgency was familiar. As she scrubbed in, a new attending glanced at her. I hear you're the reason this place still stands. Emily met his gaze. I hear you're the reason this patient might live. Let's focus. He smiled, nervous, grateful. Yes, ma'am. The surgery went smoothly. Not because nothing went wrong, but because when it did, people spoke up, adjusted, listened. When it was over, the attending thanked her. Emily shrugged. You did the work. He shook his head. You set the tone. The hospital made its decision quietly, the way it did everything else now. Dr. Richard Halden was officially terminated. The announcement cited irreconcilable breaches of professional conduct and failure to maintain a safe clinical environment. There was no press release, no dramatic fallout, just a closed office, a removed nameplate, a door that never opened again. Emily read the notice once, then deleted it. The agent found her in the cafeteria at dawn, stirring oatmeal she hadn't touched. They offered you a commendation, he said. Formal, public. Emily didn't look up. I decline. They expected that he admitted. They also offered a consulting role. She smiled faintly. Let me guess. Strategic oversight. Something like that. I'm where I need to be, she said. He studied her. You could shape policy, save more lives. I save lives here, Emily replied. One at a time, without speeches. He nodded, accepting the answer. He's going to testify. Good, Emily said. And after that, she paused. After that, the work continues. As the sun rose, casting pale light through the cafeteria windows, Emily stood to leave. The agent watched her go, then glanced back at the hospital, a place that had changed without announcing it. That night, as Emily walked her usual route through the surgical wing, a new nurse hesitated before approaching her. Can I ask you something? The nurse said. Emily stopped. Of course. What do you do when you're not sure? The nurse asked. When everyone's looking at you, Emily considered the question, then answered simply. You listen. To the patient. To the room. To the part of you that knows when silence is no longer an option. The nurse nodded, absorbing it. Down the hall, alarms began to sound again. A new emergency. A new test. Emily turned toward it without hesitation. Because the measure of authority isn't how loudly it speaks, it's whether it's still there when everything else falls quiet. The call came just before midnight. Not over the intercom, not with alarms. Just a quiet notification on the board that made experienced staff straighten without knowing why. OR4. Incoming emergency. Emily Carter looked up from the chart she was reviewing. For a moment, the hospital felt exactly as it had the night. Everything changed, fluorescent lights, humming corridors half empty, the weight of unseen lives pressing against the walls. She stood and moved without hurry. Outside OR4, the surgical team was already assembling. A different mix this time. Younger, less rigid. They watched Emily approach not with awe but with expectation. What do we have? She asked. The attending doctor, Melissa Grant, newly promoted, steady but still carrying the edges of nerves, answered immediately. Multi-vehicle collision on I-95. One critical. Massive internal trauma. ETA 2 minutes. Emily nodded once. Prep for instability. Assume secondary injuries. Grant didn't question it. Already doing it. That alone told Emily everything she needed to know. The gurney burst through the doors, moments later rain still clinging to the paramedics' jackets. The patient was young, early 20s, bloodied, unconscious breath shallow and uneven. Monitors connected. Numbers flashed. The rhythm of urgency returned. But this time, it was different. BP's falling, the anesthesiologist said. Let's slow down, Grant replied, surprising herself. She looked to Emily. What do you see? Emily scanned the patient. Chest, rise. Skin tone, subtle asymmetry near the abdomen. A bleed we haven't found yet, she said. Don't chase the obvious. Grant nodded. Agreed. Let's verify before cutting. The resident moved faster, not frantic, just focused. Instruments passed smoothly. No raised voices, no overlapping orders. The room worked like a single organism. When complications surfaced, and they did, they were addressed without drama, adjusted, corrected. The patient's vitals dipped, then steadied. Dipped again, then rose. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, Grant stepped back, exhaling. He's stable. A quiet relief spread through the room, not applause, not celebration, just gratitude. As the patient was wheeled out toward the ICU, Grant turned to Emily. Thank you. Emily shook her head. You did what mattered. Grant smiled. I listened. That was enough. Later, as Emily charted at the nurse's station, she noticed a group of younger staff watching her, not staring, not whispering, just observing the way people do when they're trying to understand something real. One of them spoke up. Nurse Carter, yes, is it true? About before the nurse asked carefully. Emily met her eyes. What matters is now. The nurse nodded, satisfied. At dawn, Emily stepped outside onto the staff balcony overlooking the city. The sky was pale blue, the kind that promised a clear day. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, life continuing indifferent to individual victories. Her phone buzzed. A message from the agent. He testified this morning. Full cooperation. It's over. Emily stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back. Good. She slipped the phone into her pocket and leaned against the railing. Below her, the helipad stood empty. No rotors, no urgency, just painted lines and quiet concrete. Behind her, footsteps approached. Dr. Grant joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. I figured you might be here. She offered one. Emily accepted it. They're talking about you, Grant said gently. Emily took a sip. They always talk. Administration wants to formalize your role. Lead consultant. Emergency response authority. Emily considered the steam rising from the cup. And if I say no, Grant smiled, then they'll keep listening anyway. Emily nodded slowly. Then that's enough. They stood in silence for a moment. You know, Grant said when everything went wrong that night, people followed you without thinking. Emily looked out at the city. People follow clarity. Grant glanced at her. And courage. Emily didn't respond. When her shift ended, she changed in the locker room, the familiar dented door squeaking as it always had. Same scrubs folded, same badge clipped on. Nothing about her appearance had changed. But when she walked through the hospital now, people didn't look past her. They didn't rush her. They listened. As Emily headed toward the exit, the night shift charge nurse called out, "See you tomorrow." Emily smiled faintly. Always. She stepped outside into the morning air. The OR had fallen into chaos once, and a quiet nurse had spoken one line that changed everything. Not because she wanted power, not because she demanded respect, but because when the moment came, she stood where she was needed, said what had to be said, and took responsibility when others could not. And that, in the end, was the kind of authority no badge could ever give. There's a powerful truth hidden in moments of chaos. Real leadership doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself. In life, we're taught to respect titles, volume, confidence that fills a room. We're told that authority looks loud, certain, untouchable. But the moments that truly define us rarely wait for permission. They arrive suddenly when pressure is highest, when fear is loudest, when mistakes are easiest to make. And in those moments, what matters most isn't who speaks the loudest. It's who sees the clearest. The quiet nurse didn't take control because she wanted recognition. She did it because someone had to take responsibility when others couldn't. That's the difference between power and purpose. Power demands obedience. Purpose earns trust. In your own life, there will be moments like that, maybe not in an operating room, but in your family, your work, your community. Moments where staying silent feels safer, but speaking up feels right. Moments where doing the right thing may cost you comfort, approval, or status. Those moments shape who you become. So here's the question worth asking yourself tonight. When chaos shows up uninvited, will you wait for someone else to lead? Or will you quietly step forward and do what needs to be done? If this story moved, you share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, And what time it is there right now, we read every single one. And if you believe stories about courage, integrity, and quiet strength deserve more space in the world, don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might remind you of who you really are.